Special thanks to our promotional partners at the American Philatelic Society.
The APS is the largest stamp collecting organization in the world, supporting collectors of any level worldwide.
For more information about membership and APS services, visit stamps.org.
I'm Charles Epting from H.R. Harmer in New York City.
And I'm Michael Cortese of Noble Spirit in Pittsfield, New Hampshire.
And this is Conversations with Philatelists.
So, Charles, our guest today, I think you probably know him a lot better than I do.
I know him all too well because Bill Bergstrom he's been with H.R. Harmer for a number of years. Bill was basically the person I was assigned to work under when I was hired at H.R. Harmer 4.5 years ago. Bill was the senior philatelist at H.R. Harmer at that point. And one of my initial jobs with the company was to learn how to describe and learn about stamps. And I was basically under Bill's command. So Bill would come into my office with a rolling rack, like one of the big rolling racks that fits like 16 bankers boxes. Mm-hmm. And he would just park into my office and he'd be like, when you're done with this, come see me and I'll have more for you. Bill, in all seriousness, I've worked very closely with Bill now for 4.5 years. There's very few days in that period where we haven't spoken, either when we were in the office together in California or now that he's in Florida, I'm in New York. We speak on the phone daily. Everything I don't want to say everything because I try and read on my own and I try and teach myself and better myself. But even that, I wouldn't have that drive without Bill. Effectively, everything I know, which is still very little compared to most people, but it comes from Bill. It is from watching Bill. It is from asking Bill questions, much to his chagrin, too many questions. And I really wouldn't be half the philatelist I am now if it weren't for working under Bill so closely. Mm-hmm. And I am really indebted to him for everything he's taught me in this business, not just about stamps, but about how auctions are run or how to deal with customers or how to handle certain situations. Bill, and he'll tell us all this, I'm sure, but he's been in the auction business this is his 40th year. He has worked for a number of great auctioneers and auction companies. Bill is really as accomplished and long-lived a describer in this hobby. A lot of people come and go. Bill's been doing this nonstop for 40 years, and it's incredible. I'm privileged to have worked under him, and I was really excited. Bill is not the most public person. It's like pulling teeth to get him to go to a stamp show with me. Even when we were in California, I'd say, hey, let's go to Orco Expo or Sescal. It's like literally a half hour away. And even that process was difficult because Bill is happiest in the office with stamps. So the fact that Bill agreed to do this, I'm really excited to talk to him. And this is a special one for me because, again, Bill is a huge part of the reason why I'm still doing this 4.5 years later.
Well, I feel like a lot of people don't get the whole mentor thing. So, I mean, that's pretty huge that opportunity was there for you.
If I hadn't had him to study under, I probably would have gotten bored or frustrated within weeks, days, hours.
Well, I mean, that must happen to a lot of people who want to get into collecting, and then they don't have someone to help them get the knowledge base that they want to get or direct them into the correct path.
And as great as it is to read auction catalogs or read books or journals like I'm doing all the time, there is nothing that beats, grabbing something, you have a cover or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I just go into Bill and I'm like, Bill. And it's a running joke between Bill and I do ask too many questions. But you can't beat that sort of expertise to say, Bill, what's this? Have you seen one of these before? What do I do with it? Is it regummed? Is it reperfed? Is it whatever? When you have somebody you can lean on like that,
right. Because it's a conversation.
Help.
It's not just you reading.
It's a conversation with philatelists.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. That's true.
But having that back and forth again, the fact that it's not just a one-way street. I'm not just trying to osmose knowledge from these books. The fact that I can, he can rebut me or I can rebut him, and we can figure it out. That's something that's been really, really special and really helpful. For me. So I'm really excited to welcome Bill from his home in Florida. This is going to be a fun one, I think.
Yeah. All right. Let's bring him in.
There's Bill.
Hello.
Hi.
Bill, thank you for joining us. It's weird seeing you on Zoom because I'm so used to seeing you either in the office or I just saw you in Missouri to work on our latest catalog production. But thank you for joining us remotely from your home in Florida.
It's no problem. Thanks for the invitation.
So, for people who maybe don't know the name Bill Bergstrom, I was just saying as we were speaking to Bill a minute ago, I would guess that 99.9% of people listening to this right now have read at least one of Bill's auction lot descriptions, if not hundreds or thousands of Bill's auction lot descriptions. Bill, you've been in the business for about 40 years now, is that correct?
Yeah, since May of 1980.
Take us back when you were growing up. How did you first discover stamps? How did you get involved in the hobby? And what sort of caused you to make the transition from maybe just collecting stamps as a kid to making this something that you wanted to do full time? Because I know that you had very different career plans, as I did, before stamps got in the way and ruined everything.
Well, like most collectors, my mother started me off when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. She was just a general worldwide collector, and so obviously I sort of followed the same path. We bought approvals from H.E. Harris and a couple other places, 100 stamps for a nickel, or we go down to the local 5 and dime and buy the 100 topical packet for 89 cents kind of thing. And then I just kept doing that till I got to high school, and then, like most people, I just put it aside. There was a lot more important things to do, a lot more interesting. Obviously, I didn't keep it going through college. Again, more interesting things to do and the like. And then when I went to graduate school at Illinois, I found I had a little more free time on my hands, so I picked up the collection again and started filling in some, my U.S. collection. And in hindsight, I did it very badly because I bought everything at high retail and instead of half face like you could get it now. While at graduate school, I was in the chemistry end of things. I decided early on that I really wasn't liking coming home smelling like chemicals or burning my hands with acid, or my lab coat was all full of holes. It just was not healthy. Anyway, in Stamps Magazine, which was publishing at the time, there was an ad in the Help Wanted section for an auction describer. And I thought that looked a little bit interesting. I had no idea who it was. I had never participated in auctions before. I had just recently become a member of the APS, and I had ordered my first auction catalog from H.R. Harmer's, coincidentally, something called the Capital Collection. It probably would have been 1979, 80 or so. And so I answered the ad, and Jacques Schiff of Ridgefield Park, New Jersey, got in touch with me. This was in February of 1980. Asked, and we just kind of did a general interview over the phone, what I collect, all that kind of thing. And in the end, he was convinced, that I was a total novice, didn't really know anything other than, this stamps from the United States, this one's from Great Britain, and so on. But he was about to do a show in Chicago at Compex probably in March or April. So I went up to meet him, and we talked some more. And it turned out that I was ideally suited for what he needed, somebody cheap, because I didn't know anything, and that's what he could afford at the time. So it all worked out. I finished up my graduate school in May of 1980. Went home for a week, told my parents what was going on. They weren't entirely happy, but understood. Then the following week, I was in my car driving out to New Jersey, and then that began my auction lot describing career.
Did you anticipate when you made that drive that you would still be describing auction lots? Was it something you thought would last long term, or was this a stopgap after your graduate school? What was going through your mind at that point?
I had absolutely no intention or no idea that it would become full time. I thought and my parents thought the same thing, that I would just go and try it, and it really wouldn't suit me, or I'd find it too dull, or it just completely boring, and I'd give it up in 6 months and go back to school.
Ironically, that's what you thought of me when I joined H.R. Harmer as well, to show you how things come full circle.
Yeah, I didn't give you 6 months. But after I got there and just started doing the work, it was something that appealed to me. It's a lot of, I call a lot of anal work. It's repetitive counting, sorting, classifying, counting, all that, the stuff that some of my chemistry background actually helped me with. But in the end, I just kept at it, and 6 months grew to a year, and then so on and so forth. And my parents appreciated that I never had to move back home. I just stayed in and worked for him up until 1992. Just started out doing the really basic stuff, counting face, counting plate blocks for wholesale lots, and so on. He was a pretty good teacher. He was an expert in early 20th century U.S. The Washington Franklin period, coils, things like that, and of course freaks and errors. And I learned from him over the years, and then finally left in 1992.
I never met Mr. Schiff, but I'm sure a lot of people listening knew him or knew of him. But I feel like I knew him because of the stories you have told me over the years. How would you characterize working for Jacques Schiff? And are there any particular highlights or anecdotes that you care to share about your time in his office?
Jacques Schiff was, like a lot of people in the stamp business, a lot of businesses they're sole proprietorships, and in the course in the stamp world, we're kind of a little off, anyways. He started when he was a kid up near Columbia University in New York, and spent some time in the Army as an MP in Austria after the war, and that kind of attitude kind of carried with him over into the stamp business and so on. He was somewhat authoritarian, strict, always very fair. I mean, he treated everybody pretty much the same way. Some people could deal with it, and some people couldn't. I know one guy, one dealer who dealt a lot with him, and they would have a meeting in the other dealer's car, as a matter of fact. And once the other guy just had enough, he would light up his cigar, and then that would signal the end of the meeting, because Jack wouldn't be able to stand the cigar smoke, and he just that was the end of it, and the meeting was over. Probably the most memorable thing that happened while I was there was the discovery of the CIA Invert. We found out later, obviously, that it was CIA employees went down to the post office to buy some dollar stamps, and they thought something looked off. So they went to a Northern Virginia stamp dealer who referred them to Jack. And then they brought the sheet up, and Jack looked at it, immediately knew what it was. And after checking out with the Bureau of Engraving and Printing that it hadn't been stolen or gone out through a back door, which a lot of things had, he determined that it was legitimate, and he ended up buying it. Not a whole lot of it was made initially. We sold a single in the auction at Ameripex in 1986, and I think it brought like $5,500. And then I think Donald Sundman up at Mystic had put together a consortium or a group of people who wanted to buy a big block of, I think it was 94 stamps in the original sheet. And they ended up buying half of a half sheet. But they went through the actual process of filing the Freedom of Information Act to find out, where the CIA employees, bought the sheet. Was there any funding business going on, and so on. And after the postal inspectors did everything that they do, everything was legitimate. The CIA employees got the ultimatum: either give back your copy or your money, or you're going to get fired. And I think some of them actually got fired, and some of them stayed. But anyway, that when it came out that it was CIA employees that were involved, then the media started to get involved. And I remember one day in the office, we started getting calls from the news services, CBS, the local TV stations in New York City, some people down in Washington. And I remember doing phone interviews, lining up people to see Jack in his office about doing an interview about the CIA stamp. So that was probably the most memorable thing that happened while I was there. Other than the fact, he used to go to shows all the time, so I got to travel all the country. I got to go to Europe a few times. So that was always a big advantage. But all in all, I learned a great deal about the auction business from him in 12 years, a lot about what to do and what not to do. And that's kind of carried over up to where I am now.
Not a lot of people get to learn that way from auctioneers or from dealers putting in, because it feels like there's such a close circle that people are just rehiring within the community. They're not really bringing in new people or beginning collectors like that. Did you find yourself, as you were learning, attributing lots and everything like that, being more pulled in one direction and enjoying U.S. covers or anything like that more?
As opposed to somebody like a Siegel or at the time a Christie's, Jack was more a general auction house. Mm-hmm. Back when I first started, there were 30, 40, 50 auction houses with dozens of them in New York City area alone. I mean, you couldn't go a week without having a Harmer auction or a Siegel auction or a Simi's auction up in Boston or a Kaufman auction. Now, it was much, much different than it is now. Mm-hmm. But we were much more a general house, so I got my fingers wet in a lot of different areas. Now, Jack was obviously well versed in U.S., so obviously he did most of the U.S. describing or a good part of it. So that kind of pushed me over into the British and the foreign area, where even today that's kind of where I feel more comfortable. But I just want to mention what your motto is. Your mantra in life is still that you don't do U.S. No, I don't do U.S.
and then I give Bill a gigantic pile of U.S. and 2 or 3 days later it's done, and I say, Bill, I thought you didn't do U.S. So even though I would say tend towards British and foreign, your U.S. expertise is still relatively unmatched.
Well, I always I preface I don't do U.S. so that, when it all goes haywire, I don't get blamed. But in the whole scheme of things, I've had to become sort of a generalist and know a whole lot of a lot of things about a lot of different areas, and I can't really claim to be a quote unquote expert in any one particular area, although I'm well versed in many of them. But I could never, for example, I could never be a judge at an exhibition or write a book, stuff like that. I don't have that kind of breadth of knowledge, but in an overall sense, yeah, there's really nothing that I either haven't seen or I couldn't, get a hold of.
From Schiff, you've sort of rubbed shoulders with a lot of different auction houses and a lot of different companies over the years. Where did you go from Schiff? What was your next move after that?
In 1992, there were two guys who were working at William A. Fox, and also a northern New Jersey auction house, who were itching to get on their own. So the three of us pooled our meager resources and went into business and took Lowell Newman's name, the Lowell S. Newman Auctioneers. We were in Weehawken, New Jersey from 92 to, I left in 97, but they kept on going another year. It was a terrific experience, being in an ownership position as opposed to, just an employee. And for the first 4 or 5 years, things were really good. It got to the point where we were really, sort of underfinanced and got into a little trouble that way. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall. And there was another opportunity that came up that somebody told me about, down with Matthew Bennett down in the Baltimore area. So in 97, I left New Jersey and moved down to Maryland and went to work for Harvey Bennett in his father. He had taken over his father's firm early in the early 90s. And I got there in 97 and worked there until 2002. Now, the thing about working at Bennett's that was so different, and I told Harvey this one time, we were doing an auction over at the Ballpex Stamp Show, and they usually like to start their auctions out with collections, in this case, U.S. collections. So the first page of the catalog there's the heading up the top, so there's only like room for 6 lots at the bottom half of the page. And after this first session had sold, I went up to Harvey and said, your first 6 lots sold for more than Jacques Schiff did in an entire year. So that was kind of a wake-up call to the big-time auctions, ones where they were actually getting, big, serious collections. I asked Harvey one time what it would take for him to go leave the office to go see a collector to go actually pick up his collection, and he said 500 certificates. Oh. So that's kind of a different mindset than when I was where I had been previously, where we would travel pretty much anywhere to get a $5,000 or $10,000 collection, and I pretty much do the same thing today, within reason. But the experience at Bennett's was kind of like going from the minor leagues to the professionals. And that's also where I got my chance to not only to write the lots, but I actually did the catalog layout and production and got it, I laid out the pages, put in the photos, and got it ready for the printer. And that was also something quite different. Back when I first started, what everybody used to write your lots by hand on your lot card. Then you would put them in order, send them off to a printer. In our case, and almost everybody in New York used Cosmos Press. They would do the typesetting, send all the pages back, you'd correct and get it all done that way before an actual catalog was printed. Now, you could do everything in-house. You could set your type, you could lay out the pages, you could put in the photos, you could do everything, put it on a disc and hand it to the printer, and then a week or so later you get your catalog back. It also, it made it much less expensive to do color. It made it much less expensive to put photos inside of the text, as opposed to, I don't know, you've probably seen old-time catalogs. There's a whole front section full of text and then a whole back section full of photos, and you have to go back and forth. This made it much more convenient, much more user-friendly. And that was another place where I learned quite a bit. Then I was there for until 2002, at which point another describer who was at Bennett with me, a guy named George Eveleth, who had worked for Greg Manning before, had gotten an offer and he wanted me to come with him. So I did that, and since 2002 I've been with the on and off Greg Manning organization and all of its component parts, of which H.R. Harmer is really the only one left as a going concern.
So explain that part of the hobby's history. We need a board with pins and strings to trace just what happened. But effectively, when you went to Greg Manning, that was your introduction to the Harmer's organization, and here you are, 18 years after that.
Well, Greg didn't buy Harmer's from the family until probably 3 or 4 years after I got there. But yes, that's when I started doing Harmer work. Somebody else was the president, and they kept the office in New York City for a while before moving it over to New Jersey and then to Connecticut and out to California and then back to New York.
And your time with Harmer's has been uninterrupted since then, is what's really is that correct?
No.
You're the last one standing is really what matters.
Pretty much, yes. When the Manning organization had their kind of troubles with the Finza and the Escala group and all that, and the things that went on in Spain, there was a lot of corporate shakeup and so on, and they ended up closing the New Jersey office and moving to Connecticut. Now, even when they were in New Jersey, I was still living in Maryland and would commute back and forth. There was no such thing as internet access to the auction system and so on. So I would come up for a week, stay home for a week, and bring things back and forth. When they moved to Connecticut, they fired a lot of staff, and I was one of them. So I was still in Connecticut, unemployed for a while, but then they started calling me back to freelance, to write lots for them. And now I would drive up to Connecticut and back and forth. And eventually they wanted me to move up to Connecticut full time. So I did that and moved to Connecticut. And we were there for a year before they decided to close down. At this point, the majority owner of the Manning organization was a group called Spectrum, the Spectrum Group, which was mostly a coin auctioneer wholesaler based out of California. They were the majority owner at this point. And they didn't really like having no oversight over the stamp business, so they decided to close it down and move out to California. So we moved out to California for a year. And then they didn't like that the coin auctions were operating differently than the stamp auctions, and they didn't understand really how stamp auctions could work. The biggest probably difference is you watch the coin guys, and they're all walking around these little trays full of red boxes full of slabbed coins. And if you've ever seen the slab coins, they have a barcode of some kind on them, and they can really keep very detailed track of inventory. You go bring in a 50 carton stamp consignment, which may have millions of stamps in it. They couldn't understand. Well, how do you inventory that? They just really didn't understand how the stamp business worked. So in a sense, they shut it down almost to its bare bones, and all the philatelists got fired again. So I moved back to Maryland, but then they kept calling me back. So I would fly back and forth between California and Maryland to come out and do some work. And then they wanted me to come out to California to work full time again. So I did that. And then they decided to close the California office because the people who own the company now felt that Harmer's of New York needed to still be a going concern. It had a certain cachet to it, which it does. And they were on the verge of getting an incredibly powerful collection from the Haub family, and selling it in New York was certainly a whole lot more appealing than selling it in backwater California. So they closed up the office in California, moved it to New York City, where Charles is sitting right now, and I got retired again to Florida, where I still travel back and forth to the office to come back and write lots whenever New York City isn't closed. And as you heard Charles mention previously, we just closed out a couple of weeks in St. Joseph, Missouri, to do this last catalog. So lots of frequent flyer miles, lots of back and forth across the country. It's certainly been an interesting ride.
So
I'm going to ask a question. Oh. Michael, you go first.
I was just going to ask, I don't think we've talked about this before, and for those who don't know, when you're describing a lot, say a carton, 50 carton lot comes in like you talked about before, and 3 cartons of it is this terrific Rhodesia collection, and you're in charge of describing it, are you also breaking down or breaking out individual stamps? How does that process work when are you just handed raw cartons and you are in charge of creating each lot, or are you in charge of just writing the descriptions? If you can talk, I don't even know if we can talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
Okay.
Early in my career, I was handed stuff to write.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I certainly was new enough that I didn't know what's a lot, what isn't a lot. Nowadays, sometimes I get handed a lot, and here's what you do. Mm-hmm. It could be the Rhodesia collection, and then what I would do is go through it and determine what's a lot, what isn't. And now a lot of that is going to depend on the condition of the stamps inside of it. There are lots of Rhodesia stamps that are individual lots on their own,
right?
Say the 1 pound doublehead. But if it's faulty, or if it's got problems, it's best left in the collection. Why would you sell individually a stamp at 10% of catalog when it stays in the collection that sells for 20?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a judgment call to make. There's also been many cases where I walk into the room with the 50 cartons and, okay, have at it, just do whatever you need to do. And that's a part of this profession that I enjoy very much, just going through boxes, sorting them into, U.S. pile, British pile, foreign pile, cover pile, junk pile, and so on. And then when you're done with that, you go through each pile and you just make the lots that are appropriate. One of my old bosses told me, and this is going to sound strange to people who aren't in this business, is he said that each collection will talk to you and tell you how it wants to be broken down and described, because every single collection is different. Even if somebody has a complete U.S. collection, say 1900 to date, and thousands of people have one of those, each one of them is going to be different. Even if all of them just tried to collect mint never hinge, or all just used, each one is going to be different. I mean, if they're never hinged, did they happen to buy regum stamps? Are there some reperf in there as well? Did they buy some fake coils? Are they all well centered? Do some of them have certificates? Each one of them is going to be different. So you have to treat each one individually. There's no just blanket, this is what it is. And although that has started to come true for like post 1935 U.S., for example, you really don't go through it all that much. You see if he's got a legend sheet, or he's got an imperf bugs pane, or if he, things like that. That's almost bread and butter rote kind of stuff. But really, every single collection is different. And if I got a collection today and I got the same collection 2 weeks from now, there's a chance I might not treat them, the lotting might not end up exactly the same.
Right.
I'm going to ask you a question that you have to answer, although it's a remarkably difficult question. How many lots do you think you've written? in your career? I'm putting the over-under at 100,000.
Oh, I would think it's more than that.
What would your guess?
All right,
Quarter of a million?
In the 12 years I was at Schiff's, we did 8 auctions per year of about 2,000 lots per sale. And I would imagine, well, in the beginning, I probably wrote a smaller percent, but towards the end, I probably wrote most of it. At Newman's, we did, while I was there, we had 35 auctions, probably 15 to 200. Yeah, it's over $250,000. Yeah, I really hadn't thought to add it all up, but I've probably written lots for well over 500 auctions. So yeah, I'm going to guess, yeah, it's probably up there.
Do you feel like you've seen everything by now? Or are there still collections and consignments that you come across that excite you or that teach you something that you actually want to learn, that you don't feel, forced to learn? Are there still things that you find that, remind you why you drove from Illinois to New Jersey in the first place?
Well, at this point, yes, I've seen, quite a bit. Obviously not as many as Siegel has, but half a dozen airmail inverts. The whole sheet of the CIA, or what was left of it, the CIA invert. There's lots of things I've seen, and sometimes, I get a little jaded. Charles has heard me say that. But for example, in the last few years, each time an Van Hout collection or consignment has come in, I find that tremendously interesting. Last year we did a Spanish-American War collection, which I found very interesting. So they're getting fewer and farther between, but there are still things that sometimes surprise me, but it's always interesting. I'm very rarely bored, unless like a UN collection comes in.
I think now that's
the fourth or fifth time.
I was going to say a majority of our guests have made a disparaging remark towards UN collections now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a safe one. I could mention lots of other countries where I have absolutely no interest, or I tend to push it aside and want to do it at the very, very tail end. But
you leave it on my desk.
No, I haven't done that for a very long time. But yeah, UN is the safe choice to say that I really don't. Really, no interest. But I also got to remember that back when I first started, UN was a very big deal. I mean, we're getting $300 a shot for a number 38 sheet.
Wow.
It was a completely different market then. Set of Zeps going for a normal hinge set, 8,000. $200 for a 50-cent Zep. $500 or $600 for a $5 Coolidge block. It was a completely different market then than it is now.
Wow.
That's a good segue into my last question for you. Obviously, technology has changed catalog production and the way auctions are held. Obviously, the markets have changed. Things that I'm sure I could have picked up for pennies on the dollar 40 years ago are now selling like crazy, and things that would have cost me thousands of dollars back then are now postage nearly. Other than the obvious ones, again, technology or the changing market, what would you say the biggest change has been working for an auction house in 1980 versus working for an auction house today? Or is it the same? Do you have the same mindset when you sit down in front of a...
An auction it really doesn't change over the years. It's really just a matter of taking material, presenting it to bidders, and then paying the owners. It's really, there's really no difference, between the Ferrari sale or, the Casper sale. It's really just the same thing. All it is really is the technology difference. Also, back when I started, you would have an auction floor of 50 or 100 people. And some of them would be agents, but you just have a floor full of people, and now with the internet and so on, really you could have a floor of nobody, which
are you referring to earlier this year?
Which unfortunately has had to happen, especially in the New York City area. But the technology has made it such that you really don't need a physical floor anymore. It's very different than, and it's a lot less fun. I'm sure Charles is an auctioneer now. You'd much rather face an audience of 30 or 40 people with half of them raising their hand, as opposed to watching
three screens,
online bidders, or maybe the one agent on the floor and a telephone bidder. It was just a lot more fun back then. Plus, there were a lot of interesting characters back then. Among the auction agents, the dealers, the young dealers. Back when I started, there were 10 or 20 guys, that were my age. Some of them are still around now. Unfortunately, Bill Langs was one of them. He just passed away recently. But it was that generation that came up with me that is not going to be. Frankly, I don't think it's going to be replaced.
Well, you've got two in front of you right now.
Well, okay, it's not going to be replaced to the same extent that there was back in the day. Like I said, there were, just in New York City, there were probably 10 or 20 auction houses, all just employing their own describers and so on, and that's just not happening today. There's either a lot more freelance, or you're not running as many sales as you used to. Harmer's used to run a sale, Charles, every 2 or 3 weeks? We
were doing a sale a week from like December until June every year.
Yeah, and and that's just not done anymore. So if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 months between catalogs, you really don't need as many people in your production staff. So there's a lot less, fewer staff involved, and other than having Charles around, I mean, I probably had 5 or 10 different people to mentor me throughout my career. There's really not that much of it anymore. So I think the business will miss that as well.
Bill, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope it wasn't too painful. We really, again, it's nice to talk to you out of context. I'm so used to talking to you in a purely business, setting where I'm asking you what's going on with so-and-so's consignment. It's nice to just kick back and, talk in a more relaxed setting for once. So this was really fun. And again, we want to thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. One of the things I like doing with you is every once in a while you throw out somebody's name, and I know who they are and what they did and what they collect. And
I should mention
just the other day, you said we had a new bidder, and I told you exactly what he collected. The guy from Texas.
Bill is an encyclopedia of stamp collectors. So I can find a lot card from an auction house in like 1982, and I'm like, Bill, who is so-and-so? And the proprietor of the auction house, whose handwriting is on the lot card, who probably bought the item. It's insane. I'll find a book or an article. I'll say, Bill, I just read this article by so-and-so. And you're like, oh, from some random town in Colorado. And their wife's name and their dog's name. And you're this encyclopedic resource of the last 4 decades of philately in America.
I just tend to keep a lot of useless knowledge in my head. But
which makes you dangerous. You have dirt on everyone, I think.
Things also were a little different back then. You got to. There were more shows. You got to see a lot more people and interact with collectors, dealers, auctioneers a lot more. So just by guilt by association.
Well, again, thank you for joining us. Again, to anybody listening, even if you don't know Bill personally, you know Bill's body of work. You heard it straight from his mouth. Over 250,000 auction descriptions in the past 40 years. Probably none of which have ever been returned. Is that fair to say?
No, that's not true.
But Bill, thank you, and this was a lot of fun.
All right,
Yeah,
thanks for
thank you so
having me.
much.
It was easier than I thought.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
You too.
Well, that was really interesting. I loved getting to meet him. I loved hearing his story, his perspective of coming into the hobby, and as you talked in the intro, he was brought into the hobby in the same exact way that you were, almost, with having a mentor to teach him everything he knows and the stories that came from that. And
luckily, Bill was not as militant with me as Jacques Schiff was with him, but I do think there's a lot of parallels, with our introductions to the hobby.
Yeah.
Both he and I, about the same age, just finished a science degree that we never used. So there are a lot of parallels. Yeah. And again, I'm glad you got to meet him. I'm glad other people get to hear his story, because Bill is somebody who I've been very close with for going on 5 years now. And I'm glad he was able to share that story with other people. And I'm sure that a lot of people, whether you have worked for an auction house or wanted to, I think a lot of people will see different pieces of his story. They might see themselves in it.
Yeah, I always heard about the CIA Invert Sheet, but to be able to talk to a person who actually
to be there in the office when it walked in,
right, and talk about the procedure they went through to ensure that it was, because they can't just send that off to the PF, the APS,
no,
because it hadn't existed before.
No, in that era, I know there were a lot of things that were escaping from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing that shouldn't have been escaping. People would go on a tour of the facility and then come out with their pockets overflowing with, printers' waste.
And that sheet in particular was so used to getting the shifts all over the place to see the first one that was actually flipped. I mean,
and the fact that you have the serendipity of the fact that it was, people hear CIA Invert and it makes it sound like it's a James Bond film or something. But the fact that it was discovered by CIA employees and not like Department of the Interior employees, the Department of the Interior or Department of Health doesn't have the same cachet that CIA has. Yeah. So I feel like the marketing of that sheet was really fortunate as well.
Yeah, and they still go for good money, I think, and they're still all being turned over at certain points. I actually don't know. What's the largest multiple that's still in existence? Is it
we sold a block of 4 at the New York 2016 show.
Okay.
I did not fully appreciate because I had been with the company for a month at that point, and I didn't know what was going on yet. They actually, I had to carry that home to New York with me in my luggage.
Oh, wow.
And if I recall, they didn't tell me what it was until I got back. Because they didn't want me freaking out. They just gave me like a sealed envelope, and they were like, "Don't let this out of your sight."
Yeah.
And that was one of the first times I wondered what I had gotten myself into.
Well, those are my favorite kind of stories. I mean, I've done that where you got to stuff a $300,000 stamp album in your carry-on luggage, and you want to put it above you so that you can see it, not behind you, just in case somebody takes the wrong suitcase out.
Everyone's wondering why you're like hugging a backpack,
right?
But then you don't want to hug it because then it looks suspicious,
right? Because that brings attention to it, and then when they find out it's a stamp, they're like, "Oh, it's just a stamp." But then you're like, "No, it's a stamp." Yeah. What can I ask you what it sold for? That's public record. That's ridiculous. What did it sell for?
Yeah, that's cool. I want to say it sold for $50,000 for the block.
50?
Of 4.
Yeah.
50.
Yeah. All right, cool.
I want to, but we can check that. We can do a follow up next week to see how good my memory is.
I can actually grab a photo and have it. Your block, was it a plate number block or was it a center line, or you don't know? It's fine. You don't need to.
I've been with the company a month at this point. I had bigger things on my mind than whether it was a plate block or not. I'm going to look it up right now because I don't want to have to come back and check the tape later. Okay. It was a 16-page exhibit, including 4 double pages chronicling the production and use of the $1 Americana Series issue.
Nice.
It includes 4 CIA inverts, the Discovery damaged copy presented as a gift to dealer Jacques Schiff, 2 inverts, and the White Bandit right variety. So it was not a block of 4.
It was just 4 singles.
It was 4 singles. and that lot sold for $50,000.
But you were right on the money with the money.
See, you can expect me to be half right about anything.
At least half right.
At least greater than 50% right.
Yeah.
And one last thing before we wrap this episode up that I wanted to touch on. Bill's concluding thoughts about the future of the hobby, I know could probably be seen as pessimistic, but I don't take him to be like that. I think Bill has seen more people come and go in this hobby than anybody else. He's, had all these people work under him, and he's worked alongside so many people that I think when he talks about the fact that there's not, when he talks about Bill Langs and Mark Easter and that whole scene of New York guys who were the same age when they started, and there's 10 or 20 of them just in New York. I look around me in New York, there's not 10 or 20 other guys my age joining the hobby. I don't think Bill's being pessimistic or dour when he says that. I think it's the truth. And I don't think it means there's anything wrong with the hobby. I don't think it's a flaw in the hobby or something's fundamentally broken. I think it's just the new reality.
Yeah.
New York used to be horse-drawn carriages, and then electric, or not electric cars, but gasoline automobile. Things are going to change. New York has changed, and I don't see why the stamp hobby in New York wouldn't be the same. There's no dealers on Nassau Street anymore. There haven't been since the 80s or 90s.
Yeah.
So I think Bill's point is very well taken. Again, I don't look at it as pessimistic. It doesn't make me want to go out and find a new job by any means.
No,
I think that it's something we have to realize, that as much positivity as there is in the hobby, as much forward progress and momentum as there is in the hobby, it's going to be unrecognizable in a matter of decades, if not years,
right, to the people who had already been in it for years. And the thing is, we're right here, like you had mentioned, we're right here. It's changing. At any point, I could have been in New York as well as Alex or any of the other young philatelists. We're just in different areas, and the fact that we've got the internet and it's allowing us to connect is what is allowing the hobby to remain as powerful as it once was, with the number of collectors and the prices and everything like that. It's not. It used to be such more of a close contact, and now that the contact has lengthened, but that doesn't mean that the bond isn't just as strong.
Exactly. Again, when Bill talks about the future of the hobby, I don't see there being a value judgment in any of that. It's going to change. It's going to be different. It's not going to be better or worse. It's going to be getting very philosophical here.
Right. Well, the pandemic it's teaching us how to lean into what the tools we have and how to use them properly to make sure we promote the hobby in the best possible way, and make sure that we do the correct things to lead it on the path that it needs to be on, to remain as prevalent in everybody's lives as it always has been. And the longevity of the collectors in the hobby isn't people aren't losing interest in the hobby. People who have been here the whole time haven't lost interest, and new people coming in aren't going to lose interest. If anything, embracing the social media or embracing the internet, the accessibility of digital philately, is going to strengthen the resolve within collectors to remain in the hobby and become better collectors.
I don't know what you need me for. That sums it up perfectly.
No, I mean,
sitting here like garnish.
Well, 50 years ago, the APRL wasn't all digital. I had to go to the APS to go rent a book. I don't need to do that now.
I think the proper term is check out a book. I think you have been using Netflix for too long. That you just said rent a book.
Yeah, fair.
So there's proof that the digital has already supplanted.
It's affecting us. Yeah.
Exactly. But no, this was a fun episode. I really enjoyed this one. People who are listening can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean.
Everywhere.
If you have an RSS feed, we're there. Yeah. I still don't know what an RSS feed is, but I know
I'm
it's
not
important.
I refuse to look it up.
No, it's just what makes our podcast show up. We have a website, philatelypodcast.com. We have an email, philatelypodcast@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
You sent out an email from philatelypodcast@gmail.com setting up one of our interviews.
Yeah.
And I got confused. I thought somebody else had a Philately podcast as well. And I'm like, what are they writing me for? And then I realized it was you. So
who the hell are these guys?
Exactly. I'm like, who's this Philately podcast
Yeah.
at gmail.com? And then I realized it was us.
Yeah. No, well, people are emailing it, and what I think is so great is they're emailing it for the exact reason that we talked about earlier, is that they don't have mentors. So they're asking.
Fact check us.
Well, no, they're asking what books they should get to be beginners. To aid them in their hobby, and I'm getting to redirect them back to the APS and everything like that. And people are looking for help. And 50 years ago, there wasn't that.
They wouldn't have been able to email us.
No, they wouldn't. I don't want to say they wouldn't have been able to survive without us, but people are saying that. I'm sure certainly not.
They would have had to listen to our podcast on like a reel-to-reel tape.
Yeah.
50 years ago, they would have maybe even like a transcription disc, one of the big 16-inchers that you can't even put on a normal turntable.
Right.
I'm dating myself right now because I actually have some of those. But my computer battery is conspicuously low.
Yep.
So I don't want this episode to get cut off midway through. So I'm gonna bid you adieu, Michael.
Yep.
My girlfriend goes to France for a year, and all of a sudden I start speaking fluent French.
Well, until next time, this has been fantastic.
This has been great. I'll talk to you real soon, Michael.
Yep. See you then.